Hello everyone and welcome. I'm back in London. I've returned and have access to my superior recording equipment. I'd like to say hello to everyone listening from over 30 countries now, including Russia, Germany, the UK, Saudi, Iran, Hong Kong, Ireland and Norway. I'm keen to get you all involved as much as possible in the Edtech podcast, so please do send your comments and questions to the edtechpodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet at podcast Edtech, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook. I'm especially keen to find out what you like, what you don't like so much, where you listen, and who you'd also like on the show. In a couple of weeks, I'll be attending Edtech Europe, and if you go to @podcast Edtech on Twitter, you can vote for who you would like me to interview at the event. So check out www.edtechxeurope.com, have a look at the speakers listed, and also if you'd like to attend and get 40% off the ticket price, then don't forget to use the exclusive podcast discount code, which is ETE16 EdTech PD, so that's all capitals, ETE16 EdTech PD. Finally, Infant School ICT Coordinator Louise Stone runs an amazing podcast which you can follow on Twitter at MyLiveSchool. So the podcast is entirely run by digital learners from her school and is up for nomination for the New Media Awards Community Podcast of the Year. If you'd like to help support their cause, you can go to @L_S_Stone, and there you can help retweet and nominate them to win. So if you like the idea of launching a podcast for your own school or education community, keep listening. This week we speak to MFL Twitterati godfather Joe Dale. Joe has been tweeting, blogging and podcasting since 2006. And in this episode, find out how to make instant podcasts which enhance student learning and language skills. Also, find out the answers to the questions: what is app smashing? Will Mandarin take over from French? Are exchange programs dead? And will the education revolution be podcasted? So I'm here at the Bargeman's Rest in Newport on the Isle of Wight, and I'm sat opposite MFL Twitterati Joe Dale, and we're here to talk about podcasting and education and catch up about some serendipitous connections with regards to EdTech and I guess education on the Isle of Wight. So Joe, we were just speaking about how you've been podcasting for quite a while. Before we kick off, are you able to sort of say, you know, what your connection is to modern foreign languages, and also to, you know, what your role is essentially now, what you get up to these days as well?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on the show. I'm really flattered to be invited on any podcast, but this one is particularly enjoyable, and I'm loving the kit we've got in front of us. Obviously, as you're listening, you won't know this amazing microphone I've got in front of me, but it's absolutely lovely, and so I'm loving this. So, yeah, so I was a languages teacher myself for 13 years. I taught for 3 years at secondary level, 2 years in North Wales, which is where I did my PGCE in the late 90s, or middle 90s, and then I had a year in Somerset, in Yeovil, and then I decided to, when I saw the job on the Isle of Wight, I thought, I've never been to the Isle of Wight before, I'll have to go. Had the interview. It was another sunny day, like today, actually.
It's always sunny on the Isle of Wight.
Of course, every day's a holiday on the Isle of Wight, and I got the job, and I had incredibly happy 10 years teaching at a middle school on the Isle of Wight, teaching French.
So just to butt in there, so the funny thing about that is, so I was researching podcasts and education when I decided to set this one up, and I came across Joe's podcast, which includes episodes from Bet in 2008, I believe, and then I came across the fact that Joe is actually based in the Isle of Wight, so I thought this is, you know, too good to be true, because I have family here, so hence us meeting today. But I've recently just found out that Joe used to teach French at the middle school that I attended. So he took over from my French teacher, which was quite astounding work.
Indeed, yeah. That was very, very amusing when we discovered that a minute ago. But then that's how these things can happen. It's just one of those things, I suppose. And also on the Isle of Wight, lots of people know each other. I wouldn't say everyone knows each other, but lots of people know each other. So, particularly, and when you're in the teaching profession, and you're teaching, let's say, languages or whatever subject, then probably other teachers who teach the same subject in other schools will know who you are. So it is a very a close-knit community, which is lovely. So at Node Hill, that's why I developed an interest in the use of technology and how it can enhance language learning. And I started podcasting back in 2006. I think I was probably one of the first language teachers at the time from England to start podcasting. I know that there were people like John Johnson and Ewan McIntosh from Scotland that were podcasting probably 2005, I would say. I think that's when they started. I think there's some debate on who exactly was the first person, but anyway, we'll leave that to them. But yeah, so I was podcasting in 2006. I loved the idea of being able to promote listening and speaking skills in languages through podcasting, and having done that a lot in the classroom to start off with, I could see real benefits from the point of view of, say, improving pronunciation, the whole recording and editing process with Audacity, which is what we were using at the time. They were able to listen again and again and again to the target language, so it was absolutely fantastic. And it was something that they enjoyed doing. It was fun, and we published the podcasts. I remember doing a podcast series with my Year 7s and my Year 8s in 2007, I think it was. So it was a year after I first started. And that's still available, kids, on nodehillfrench.podomatic.com. And what we did, I basically decided on like the format of the shows, and each person, each small group, they got themselves into small groups of, say, 2 or 3 or 4 in some cases. They did an introduction. They did the presentation of grammar. It was to do with making grammar exciting by doing a podcast about it, and it was great that they wrote their script first of all, so it very much embedded the understanding of how to form the different points of grammar that we were looking at. They were able to put that together. So they did the introduction, the presentation of the different, whatever the grammar point that they'd chosen, and then they did a little quiz, and they could make up their own quiz format. But that was fantastic. So they would ask a question, give a pregnant pause for you to sort of give you some thinking time to then answer it, and then give you the answer. And that worked brilliantly, and they just really enjoyed it. And I just loved hearing all the different children's voices on the podcast, and it just sounded great. And so once we'd done all that, I put a bit of a backing track in the background, and we put it up onto Podomatic, which at the time there weren't that many sites out there where you could host for free. There was Podomatic and Podbean, and there were places like Libsyn, but I think you had to pay at that point. So I decided to go for Podomatic, and I was very happy with that. And as I said, it's still available, so you can still hear those lovely children talking about how to form the perfect tense with avoir and things like that. So yeah.
And for teachers who are listening now, would you still recommend podcasting? And I think we were just talking about a particular course that you went on that was really encouraging in terms of, are there events or things like that you think you would suggest to sort of help fuel that ambition and teachers to continue to use this model?
Yeah. I think personally, podcasting is amazing for learning in general, but particularly for modern foreign languages, and the reasons that I've described already. But I think it's been really interesting that compared to, let's say, back in 2006, when it wasn't as obvious on how to get started with podcasting, there wasn't as much content out there to sort of help you get started. YouTube had only just started 2005, so there weren't like the slew of tutorials you can get now on Audacity and all the rest of it. I remember back in the day listening to a BBC website or show to do with how to get started with podcasting in education. There was a journalist there who sadly has passed away now, who used to appear on the BBC a lot, but it was really good, and it went through step by step. You just listened to each recording and then had a play and worked out how to use Audacity and all the rest of it. Whereas nowadays with apps and what have you, it's just very easy now to get going. But what I find in a way disappointing is, even though I think podcasting is fantastic, it just hasn't had the uptake in education that I was expecting. Talking about the event that we were talking about just then, that was PodCamp UK back in 2007, and it was in Birmingham, and there were probably about 50 or 60 or have you people there, of which only a handful were from education. But I remember they were talking that it was the second year that they'd done this event, and they were talking about the year before about, that podcasting, it was going to be like a revolution, we're going to take over the world, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, with podcasts like Serial, which has been has proven to be incredibly popular recently. To be honest, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I've never actually listened to an episode of it. But anyway, because I have a podcasting Google alert on my email. So whenever there's interesting stories about podcasting, I'll hear about it. I'm particularly interested in educational podcasting, and I've heard lots of stories about Serial, showing an indication of the new wave of podcasting and how podcasting is having a second wind or what have you. But in education, there are pockets of amazing practice in the UK that I've come across and I've listened to many, many different educational podcasts, but it just hasn't taken off in the way that I thought it would. It seems to me that what young people are particularly interested in is video more than audio, even though I think audio is almost a bit forgotten in education, and audio is so powerful, and some children are a lot less self-conscious when they're recording audio compared to video, and does my hair look nice and all the rest of it. And I know, I've been there, done that, and I know, or just hearing their voice for the first time, some children find that a bit weird. But I think the potential of, as I said already, promoting listening and speaking skills, or in a wider context for audio feedback, and there's been a lot of research done over the years in various universities. There's particularly in Sheffield University, there was an event particularly about audio feedback and how it can be useful. And again, I think audio feedback is another way of using audio in a powerful way. But I just don't know that many teachers that are using it, really.
And are there any education podcasts that you would recommend people listen to?
I think the first and foremost, the one that everyone should definitely listen to is called EduTalk, which is John Johnson and David Noble, and they've been running this for years. And it's not just about, they do sort of live shows. I've been on a few times, and they do like interviews and that sort of thing. But they also encourage people to send in their audio, which again I think is amazing. It's this whole idea of a community of practice, or guerrilla podcasting. I think is a term that John coined, which I love. Or citizen radio, I think it's called as well. Same sort of idea. So people can record a bit of audio as an MP3 file and just send it through to EduTalk, and they'll publish it. And so there's hours and hours and hours and hours of content on there for all tastes. But most of them, lots of the audio recordings are interviews, and they're fascinating. I mean, I don't listen to every single one, but I would say probably every week or every couple of weeks there's a new interview on there. So again, I subscribe to RSS. So I think that's another issue as well with RSS. For those people that don't know what that means, it's really simple syndication. And I think even though it is simple, it's confusing to lots of people, I think. Or maybe with sites like Google Reader, which then closed down, and probably the most recommended RSS reader from there that sort of came in its wake is Feedly, which is the one I use all the time. And with Feedly, you don't really need to know about RSS feeds. You just need to do a search for the name of the podcast and it will come up. So I think this whole idea of explaining to people back in the early days when I was doing a presentation on what podcasting was, what's an RSS feed, how do you subscribe to an RSS feed, how do you submit a podcast to iTunes, which wasn't as straightforward, quite a few different steps. Whereas I think a lot of that has been taken away now, and it's just so easy to use a service like Audio Boom or iPadio or those sorts of non-edit podcasts. You can just record something and publish it online very, very easily, and then all you need to do is, as I said, go to say Feedly, write in the name of the podcast, and it will then come up. And also on YouTube there are so many how-to guides on how to do these sorts of things, whereas back in 2006, 2007 there just wasn't that same support. So I think it's really interesting how it's changing. But yeah, I'm genuinely disappointed that we haven't seen a revolution in podcasting education that I thought we were going to see. It just hasn't happened.
And is that one of the reasons? I mean, how come you stopped podcasting in the end?
The reason I stopped podcasting and blogging in general is just from the time point of view, that when I became an independent languages consultant, I didn't have as much time to podcast and to blog that I would have liked to have done. But having said that, what I used to do, particularly with the podcast interviews that I would do, they would take a lot of time. So in other words, first of all, you'd have to research the person. You know the person already, but obviously you want to make sure that it's professional and you ask people good questions, etc. So you'd have to do quite a lot of research and make notes. And I mean, more recently, when I've been asked to appear on podcast shows, you'd say create a Google Doc and collaborate. But I think Google Docs weren't around I can't remember when they first came out anyway. So I would just do all that probably on paper actually. So then you'd do all your research, which depending on the person, depending on how long that would take, you then do the podcast, which could easily take, let's say, an hour. Some of my podcasts are like an hour and a half, which is a bit silly, really. I think this is going to be about 20 minutes, which is probably a much better length. But I suppose I was so passionate about it, I just wanted to carry on and record. And I said, yeah, people are going to listen to an hour and a half of audio, no problem. Which, no, I think probably 20...
I think that's one of the good points of a podcast, that there is no time limit in principle in the beginning, and some of the interesting stuff comes out after that first half an hour. Yeah. So you can always edit it down, but you don't have the time pressures of, say, live radio and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the big things about comparing, say, podcasting with radio, because when I went to the PodCamp UK event, they kept talking about podcasting is like radio, or is podcasting like radio, and I never thought of it like that. I just thought of it as a separate thing, recording audio, having a conversation, interviewing, etc. But I never thought about radio. And I think the reason that some people like podcasting is because, as you just said, they don't have the same constraints as you would have if you're on the radio, and you have to, you got to say all you need to say, almost like sound bites within say 5 minutes, or
can't swear
or stuff like that. Well, yeah, I mean, as well. But yeah, just going back to the whole preparation. So you would do the recording. I would use different pieces of software at the time that would split the audio into 2 separate channels on Skype, or I'd do things face to face. So I was going to a conference and I'd record something live. But it's much better in a way to do it over Skype, because then if you have each person has a separate channel, it means you can edit each individually. And again, I had to learn how to do that. And there's a guy called Andy White who I've met, who's based in Brighton, who's not to do with education at all, but he's really into podcasting. And I think he was doing a podcasting book at one point. So I would listen to all his sorts of shows, and he showed me how to do things like split the audio in 2, and how to edit things separately, and how to if you had a podcast recording with a piece of software like I first started off with a piece of software called Pretty May. And then I went onto a piece of software called Pamela, which is what I still use now. And he showed me that when you record, one channel is directly on the left and one channel is directly on the right. And he showed me how to mix them in the middle, which made it sound much better. So you didn't have one voice in one ear and one voice in the other ear. You had both of them sort of more towards the middle of your head, which was much better, sounded much better. So those sorts of little tips that I picked up at PodCamp UK, I've used ever since, and it's wonderful. And then of course the editing. So the editing can take hours, depending on how much of a perfectionist you are.
I've edited a lot of my own ums and ahs out of these podcasts.
Yeah, and I could easily spend 5 hours doing that. And so even though I absolutely loved all those shows, and I'm very, very proud of all those interviews, and to listen back to those people talking about what they were doing back in 2007 to whenever it was when I stopped, it is just a great insight. So I'm very, very proud of the blog. It's just I just feel at the moment I haven't got time even to actually just write blog posts, let alone do podcasts.
So what is it now that you do for those people who aren't aware?
Okay, so since 2009, I decided to do what I was doing part time while I was still teaching and being head of department for the last 3 years as well, full time, which essentially is going around the world as you do, speaking at conferences and running training. So I've been to places like Australia 4 times. In fact, I'm planning a trip to Australia at the moment for July of this year. I've been to Southeast Asia many times. I've been to sort of Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur and Hong Kong and Seoul. I've been to North America. I've run training in Canada a couple of times. I've spoken at conferences in the States. I went to South America 2 years ago when the World Cup was obviously a nightmare, awful, the day before the final. So I was able to I didn't watch the game.
You didn't see the Germany game?
I did. I saw that when I was in a hotel a couple of days beforehand on the TV. But I was able to watch it on TV in Brazil, in Rio, and through the window I could actually see the
Brazilians crying.
The famous statue, which is the Corcovado in Portuguese. So the Christ and Redeemer statue, anyway, and they actually lit it up in the colours of Germany at the end, which is very cool. Anyway, so that was great, and or the Middle East as well. So yeah, so
which are some of the main events that you go and speak at?
Well, in languages in the UK, I've spoken at all the major language events such as Language World, the Language Show in London. I've done many times. I've been, as you know, I've been to BET a couple of times as well, spoken at that. The event in Australia, I've spoken at the National Languages Conference in Australia twice, so that's called the AFMLTA. So that's every 2 years, so I spoke at it in 2015 and 2013. In the States, I've spoken twice at the ACFL conference, which is the American Council of Teaching of Foreign Languages. That's every year.
And how would you say the approach to, or the progress with pedagogy behind modern foreign languages differs in each of those regions, if you were to sort of...
Okay, well, one of my passions, those people that know me know that I'm sort of, I suppose, the creator of the MFL Twitterati, which is a community of language teachers, language consultants and language associations in the UK and in Ireland. And through that community, which has over 3,700 members, we've been able to share good practice over many years. And the community, I suppose, officially started in about 2008. But when I was still at Node Hill, from 2006 to 2008, I organised what we call the Isle of Wight Conference at Node Hill. And that was when I was a Specialist Schools and Academies Trust lead practitioner. So as part of that, I was supposed to organise a big event. So I thought, I'll do a mini conference, as you do. And it was mini. The first year we had about 40 people.
Is that the one you had Drew Buddy at?
Yep, that's right, in 2008.
That's one of the podcasts I listened to, actually.
Yeah.
Because I know Drew through Teach Me at
Yeah, well, Drew's a legend, and I've known Drew for many years, and he was very kind and came down. And in fact, it was really, in lots of ways, Drew was pivotal, really, on kick-starting the whole MFL Twitterati, in a way, at that event, at the 2008 Isle of Wight Conference, because up until that point, I joined Twitter in 2007. Officially it started in 2006, but there weren't that many people on Twitter at that time. So the face-to-face meeting together at the conference was great, but even at that time, I think Drew was following about 5,000 people or something mad like that anyway. And he really encouraged everyone to start tweeting. He did say to me that actually having the hashtag IOW Conference 08 was quite a long hashtag for if you only had 140 characters in your tweet, which I thought was quite amusing. So I took that on board and everything. And also talking about John Johnson, who I mentioned already a couple of times, he actually, before these days of the Twitter walls that you can get now, he actually coded a web service for me, which allowed us to display the tweets. And if you go back to my Flickr account, which again I've not updated for a long time, you can see pictures of that web page. And so we put that on like the TVs in the hall, so people could see what people are tweeting about. And also I did like a little video clip of like a compilation of the best tweets, which was just so it was really, really, really early days. And this whole idea of a back channel, of having a Twitter back channel, that was really, well, I was one of the first people to get involved with that. So going back to your, how are we looking at pedagogy across the world? I think the great thing about the MFL Twitterati, and there are other groups in other countries, for example in America they have the Lang Chat community, but I would say that the MFL Twitterati is a larger community and also more dynamic in a way, and the fact that we're literally talking about things on a daily basis, I think that's a great way of being able to see how the technology, it's not just about technology, but how the technology can improve pedagogy. And it's very much, people are very much focused on the pedagogy and how that can be improved by technology as well as other ideas. And there's been lots of tweets recently about, or someone will tweet something about something they're doing in their classroom, and sometimes that will absolutely take off and people will really get excited about it, and that can go viral, or viral in the sense of it can go around sort of language teachers all over the world, because there are lots of people that follow the MFL Twitterati hashtag, which has been used globally for years now.
And do you have like a tweet chat, or do you just use it daily, so you do it in that way?
There have been people that have tried to do like an MFL chat, but to be honest, and that has been nice, and having like an hour focused conversation. But to be honest, we just sort of do that all the time anyway, really. Yeah. So what I like about it is the way that if someone has a question, I can retweet that, and then because I've got like 18,000 followers now, I think I'm probably again got the most followers in it for someone with an MFL background in the world, probably. But anyway, which is quite nice, and it means that people sometimes will ask me to retweet a question. I will then put it out there, and then probably there'll be someone who will know the answer who will be like maybe the expert in the field, as it were, in relation to that. So what's really good about it is that you've got people who are NQTs, you've got people who are standard language teachers and heads of department, you've also got people at primary, secondary and tertiary, and I've deliberately curated it in that way through the MFL Twitterers list that I manage in order to do that. So it's languages from all perspectives, really. which is amazing. And I wouldn't like to say how many hours I've spent on doing that, but we're leading the world really on the use of social media amongst language teachers, essentially, and it's just absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
And for everyone listening, I'm sure one of their main hopes out of the podcast is to find out, are there particular tools or apps or resources that you recommend for anyone involved in MFL as well? Okay,
well, I think from the point of view of, let's say, using iPads, I think there are lots of podcasting tools which are very useful, I think, for speaking, listening. Well, for example, a really simple one to start off with, if you have an iPad or an iPhone, is the Opinion podcasting app, which has like a red background with a little face with a little speech bubble. It's very, very simple. You just start your recording. You can then make cuts vertically, which is really nice. So in Audacity or in normal wave editors, you have the track appearing horizontally, but in Opinion it's vertically. You then literally push your finger up the track to move your way through the track. Press the scissors, it makes a lovely little scissor click as well, which is great. And then you can just cut your recording up, and then you can also change the order of the recording. So when I've been presenting about this in training, I've been showing people how easy it is to say record a dialogue and then just change the order of the questions and the answers and make sure and put them back into but then the second person would say put those back into the correct order. Okay. You can also publish what you've done onto Opinion, so you get a web space called madewithopinion.com automatically when you register for free. I'm not sure if there's a limit on how much you can record, how much you can upload to that podcast, but Wes Fryer, that I mentioned when we were talking before we started recording, his wife Shelley Fryer, off the back of me talking about Opinion, and I've done it on my YouTube channel, which is JoeDale100. I've done a couple of tutorials on how to use things like Opinion, and my favourite app at the moment for podcasting is Boss Jock Jr., which is fantastic, amazing. Shelley started creating a podcast from her classroom using Opinion. So I've done like a dummy one, which is joedale.madewithopinion.com. So once you've made your recording, you've edited it, you can then just publish it online, which is fantastic. And also you can bring in audio from somewhere else into Opinion and publish that on the Opinion podcast. So as I just mentioned, I just talked about Boss Jock Jr., which if you haven't heard about it is phenomenal. So it's based on it's like the stripped down version from Boss Jock Studio, which I think is £7 or £8, and but Boss Jock Jr. is free, and you have 20 carts. You can import audio into each cart or record it live. You can add in music as well. There's a guy called Andre Louis, whose real name is Freaky Foof, as you do. Sorry, other way around. His real name is Andre Louis. His Twitter handle is Freaky Foof, and he has created some musical tracks in Boss Jock Jr., which you can download for free, which are rights free, which is what you want in an educational context. So I started tweeting about this in August of last year at a folk festival, actually, in Sidmouth. And I was saying, this is an amazing app, this is fantastic. It's amazing this is free, it's just wonderful. And he contacted me saying, would you like for me to send you a folder of other rights-free tracks that you could use for free in Boss Jock Jr.? And I said, yes, of course. So he did that, and he's been more than happy for me to share that with other people from other, when I've been doing training on this. So as a result of that, it's literally hundreds of tracks that you can legally put in. So for promoting listening and speaking skills, I've been showing people how they can tap on, say, a music cart, starts playing the music, they can hold their finger down on the microphone, it ducks the music automatically underneath their vocal, so it means that the vocal is more pronounced, which is what you want in languages or in general in education. And then you can add little like segues, like stings, and I got those from an app called Launchpad. But again, I've included those within the Dropbox folder. So in Launchpad, you can have little sound effects. You can record those and then export them to either via email or to Dropbox, then pull them into Boss Jock Jr. So yeah, I've been able to show people how they could make their own radio show. Whereas compared to, say, using Audacity, I think I find Audacity pretty easy, but it's quite a learning curve to lots of people. And so now with those sorts of rights-free tracks, the ease of use with apps such as Opinion and Boss Jock Jr. There's also one called Ferrite Recording Studio, which is probably the closest app to, say, Audacity. it's just so much easier nowadays. So there's no excuse, people. You should all be getting out there podcasting education. It's
You've just
wonderful.
officially had your wrist slapped, everyone. Awesome. And what do you think of like these apps, popular apps, so things like Busuu and Duolingo and that kind of thing, from a more direct-to-consumer base as well?
Absolutely. So I think there's two ways of using technology in relation to improving modern foreign languages. There's the sort of the creative side, the sort of the side I've sort of mentioned, and there's lots of other apps you could have on the creative side as well. If you haven't heard of Adobe Voice, that's my top tip for if you have iPads. Adobe Voice is fantastic. But there's also that sort of rigorous, mechanistic, boring, if you like, grammar practice or vocab practice that you need to do as well in order to get that side of things sorted. So you need to have that sort of creativity, fluency, speaking work, but you also need to have that mechanistic, rigorous grammar practice. So in a secondary or primary school context, I would recommend Memrise. Memrise is fantastic. In fact, I was doing some training in Hertfordshire yesterday on Memrise.
So I've been hanging out with the Emerge Education lot quite a lot, and I think Memrise, the founder, is sort of associated or mentoring other companies that are going through that. Yeah. Ben Watley, isn't it? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and he's a lovely guy as well. Yeah. And we first had a Skype chat a while ago because I did a little presentation at a teach meet that they had at the Memrise headquarters, which is an awesome place in London, and it's sort of
whereabouts is that in London?
It's near. That's a very good question. It's near Bethnal Green, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And it's just like a very creative space. They're very creative people, and I've also met Olivia from Memrise as well, and they're just all really, really into what they're doing, and so I think Memrise is fantastic. I know that Duolingo is also very popular amongst language teachers. So again, through the MFL Twitterati, having this sort of filter of what's going out, what's going on at the moment, capturing the zeitgeist, if you like. I actually called a presentation "Capturing the Zeitgeist: What's New in the World of Technology and Education," world of technology and languages. By reading tweets through the MFL Twitterati, you get a very good picture of what are the most popular apps and tools out there. So I would say, hand on heart, Duolingo and Memrise are the most popular services. I don't know people using Busuu at all at secondary, primary level, and my impression is it's more for adult learners, but certainly Memrise and Duolingo are very popular. I
also met Joe from Outjam. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Well.
So I was at ITEFL, the ITEFL conference in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago. It was in April. And in fact, I know. I do know. It's Jonathan, isn't it? It's Jonathan. Yeah.
I live in Hackney Wick, and he works in that area as well.
Yeah,
so it's funny
nice
how
man.
you end up having meetings like this.
Yeah, very nice man. So I met him in 2013 at ITEFL because I'd been invited to go up there and take part in the pre-conference event. So I did like an hour-long presentation. That's where I met. In fact, he wrote a blog post about it. I think he found my style quite full on. Let's say I think he called it the tech apaganza or something like that. Anyway, but he, very nice man, and every year since then we've had chats with each other and what have you. So he used to work with Busuu. I'm not sure he doesn't work. He works with ELT Jam now, but he used to work with Busuu. And my impression is it's more an adult audience rather than aimed at young people.
Okay, cool. What's app smashing?
Okay, again, app smashing is something which I've been into for the last couple of years. It's a term coined by a guy called Greg Kulowick, who is a former history teacher who now works with an organisation called Edtech Teacher, and they do an event every 6 months or so in either Boston or San Diego. And I think the first one was 2013, and I met Greg. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to go to Boston and to go to this event called the iPad Summit USA. And I'm quite tall. I'm nearly 6'2", and he's a few inches taller than me. So he's a very tall man, but he really, really knows his stuff. And he coined this expression, app smash. And there were other people as well. There's a lady called Lisa Johnson who came up with this idea of app synergy. And then the idea of workflow has always been there, but app smashing has absolutely taken off. And what it is, it's essentially when you you use a number of different apps in conjunction with each other to add different layers on a final multimedia outcome. So instead of trying to do everything on the one app, which is, let's say in the past, back in 2006, using PowerPoint, you'd expect to be able to do everything in a program like PowerPoint or in Word or in Publisher. Does anyone use Publisher nowadays? Anyway, or in Publisher, and you do everything within that. Whereas the idea of app smashing is that you do a little bit of content in one app, you save it to the camera roll, you then take it from the camera. This is on an iPad, although it's not iPad specific, but most of the examples are talking about use of iPads. Anyway, you create the content in one app, you save it to the camera roll, you then pull it from the camera roll into another app, you add another layer to whatever you're doing, you save that to the camera roll, you then pull it out to another app, and you can have very complex app smashes or very simple ones. So one example would be, let's say you used an app like Pic Collage, and you put together your images and some text. So for example, you could, if you're doing, let's say in languages, you're doing something about, let's say, daily routine, so you could find some pictures of either real pictures of the children in your class pretending to wake up at a certain time or clean their teeth at a certain time, etc. Or you could just find web images, or you could draw some images and add those into Pic Collage as well, using, let's say, another app such as Paper by 53. You would then make this background image, you'd save that to the camera roll. You could then load another app such as Telegami or My Talking Avatar Free, which is like an avatar creation app which allows you to record your voice over the top. You then would add the Pic Collage as a background image, and then the character would then talk over the top, describing what's happening in the image. So in other words, you're combining those images with the spoken voice. So that would be one example. That would be a simple example of an app smash. You could, if you wanted to, then take that video clip that you created, save that to the camera roll, and then import that into something else, such as Explain Everything, and then etc. etc. So you can have very simple app smashes, and you can have very complex ones. And one of the risks of app smashing, I think, is you can get, this obviously never happens to me, listeners, but you can get seduced by the technology and forget about the pedagogy. Or not completely, but you know what I mean? You can have too much of a priority on, we've got to use 17 apps in this app smash.
I guess it's like the 80-20 rule, and if you spent like 6 hours and then you've created something for 2 minutes of the lesson, But if it has the impact, then that's good.
Exactly, but I think, again, with anything to do with sort of early adopters with technology, you get the enthusiasts who just want to try things out and make all those mistakes and what have you, and then it sort of levels down into, okay, actually, using 17 apps in an app smash is great fun, but actually it's probably best to do it with sort of 2 or 3. So I've done many presentations on app smashing, and it's something which I'm, as I said, really passionate about, because I think that if you're talking about things like accessing higher order thinking skills from the point of view of Bloom's taxonomy, app smashing is just a perfect way of doing that. Or the SAMR model, the SAMR by Ruben Puentedura, the idea that you're trying to modify or redefine the learning by using technology which would not be possible. By using technology to create a task which would not be possible without the technology in order to enhance learning. I think app smashing is a perfect way of practically facilitating redefinition or modification according to the SAMR model. So I just think it's fantastic, and lots of people I think that I've explained app smashing to have got excited about it as well. But I think what people are looking for are recipes or good sort of workflows to make app smashing work, and again, Greg has produced a book called iPad Ideas, or I think it's iPad Ideas, but if you do a search for his name, Greg Kulowick, in the bookstore, iBookstore, then it will come up, and it's supposedly volume 1. He's supposedly working on volume 2 at the moment. But if you're looking for practical suggestions on how to get started with app smashing, making things like interactive posters whereby you would create, let's say, a Pic Collage or something similar, or a photo story, put it into, say, something like Explain Everything or Shadow Puppet EDU, you could then start recording, and then you could then move from frame to frame within the app and talk over the top. So you're turning a photo story into a speaking photo story with a narration with movement, so that would be one example. He's done a tutorial on that. But also I was involved there were 5 or 6 shows called App Smash Live, which were great fun, with that Mark Anderson hosted, who I'm sure you know. And I appeared on all the shows apart from one of them. That was great fun, using Google Hangouts to bring together people from around the world who are also interested in app smashing, and just basically demonstrating live different app smash examples, and admittedly some of those were maybe a little bit over complex, but nonetheless they were still really, really good, I thought. So I demonstrated a few ideas at that, and then that's now evolved into App Share Live, which is less to do with app smashing, which is also, I've been on a couple of shows on that as well. And I just think using the technology to bring people together, doing things which you couldn't do without the technology, is a great use of it. So they've been great fun, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the Simple Exchange programme if you're a foreign language student?
I think there's been huge issues in relation to exchanges in the last few years because of the whole vetting process and having CRB checks on parents in other countries, because they just don't have the same mentality at all. In the UK, we're absolutely obsessed by e-safety and CRB checks and what have you, and the rulings now have made it very difficult to make exchanges work because of the fact that you've got these sorts of issues and parents, and like, you know, I've just become a father. I have a little boy now who's about 19 months old, and I'm very aware of, you know, obviously parents are very, very concerned about the safety of their children, obviously, but at the same time, if you have parents saying, well, have all these parents that we're sending our children to, have they all been CRB checked? They just don't have that mentality in other countries. They just don't. But here in the UK, people have to have, you know, everything has to be. So, which I'm not saying that's not an important thing, but so in lots of ways there's almost like the death of the exchange now because for those and also.
But do you see it as important to have, you know, all of this technology but still go and do the practice, you know, learning?
Obviously, I think the technology is great, but it's not a substitute for the real thing. Going to the country, speaking the language, meeting real people, you just can't beat that. That's amazing. But the practicalities of putting that in place are hard. And the other thing which I've picked up again through the MFL Twitterati in discussions with friends is that it seems that in let's say France or Germany, what have you, that it's quite easy, or it seems to be easier for to find families to host people from the UK, but not the other way around. There seems to be again a real difficulty. I know people have sort of said, well, I've got all places for everyone in you know, in France or in Germany, but I can't get enough host parents in the UK. To host, you know, a little boy from Germany or France or what have you. And I think that, again, that could be to do with the general, let's say, xenophobia that we see in the national press constantly, particularly with the whole Brexit thing now and what have you, of, you know, this anti-European feel, or people are concerned about. And I'm not saying the concerns aren't valid, but I think one could be over-obsessed by them. And if it means the death of the exchange, which I mean, there are still schools which are doing exchanges, but there are. The impression I get is there are far fewer exchanges now that are happening. People are happy to sort of go to a hotel and what have you. And when I was teaching, we would do that ourselves. We would take the children to a hotel and do like a visit. But exchanges are becoming more and more difficult. But yeah, it's an obvious thing to say. But actually going to the target country, speaking the language with real people, that's how you really learn. I think you need the grammar, you need the Duolingo and the Memrise and do all that sort of rigorous grammar practice, but you need to actually go to the country and speak, and that's how you make the language memorable. I think.
And in your time teaching as well, have you seen a trend towards a more variety of languages? So, for example, Mandarin and that kind of thing. And
yeah, that's a really interesting point. Having the luxury of being able to go to different countries, it's very interesting to see that essentially everyone is fighting the same corner for languages wherever it might be. But in England, it tends to be the big three. It tends to be French, then Spanish, then German. Whereas when I first started teaching, it was very much French, then German, then Spanish. And Spanish has become more and more popular, probably to do with holiday destinations and what have you. And I think Spanish has a certain cool about it as well. And lots of footballers, for example, in Liverpool, they had Torres, didn't they? And then they had various other Spanish players. And I think having sort of football as a hook with languages is a really good idea. But I think that in countries such as Australia or in places like Southeast Asia, the range of languages that are taught is much bigger. So you'll have European languages. You'll have, let's say in Australia, you'll have French as the most popular European language, probably followed by either German or Italian. There's a big Italian community in Australia, so that's always popular. Hardly any Spanish at all. So I've been there, four times. I've met the number of people I've met who teach Spanish, I count on one hand, I would say, which is really surprising compared to the UK. And then you'd have the Oriental languages. You'd have lots of Mandarin Chinese teachers, lots of Japanese teachers, Indonesian teachers in Australia as well. And you might have a bit of Korean, and on the European side you might get a bit of Greek as well. So the range of languages is much wider. But the language awareness, I think, as a result of that, is probably arguably better. But I think, again, in Australia they've had similar... Well, they've had issues to do with... You have like sort of different strands, a bit like in Wales as well, when you have like L1 speakers and L2 speakers of Welsh. In Australia you have Mandarin Chinese classes when the speakers are all native speakers, and then supposedly you have like the second type of classes when it's supposed to be second language Mandarin Chinese with people who have English as their first language. But apparently I've heard through colleagues or people that I've met in Australia that you get lots of people who are actually native speakers in the second band, and that's in a way why it puts off people who are trying to learn Mandarin Chinese, because it's very hard anyway. It's supposedly 4 years of learning Mandarin Chinese will be the same as learning 1 year of a European language, because it's so opaque and difficult to get into. But so there's challenges wherever you go. In the States, Spanish is very, very popular as a foreign language. When I've been to ACTFL, as I've mentioned already, the impression I get is a lot of language teachers are Spanish teachers, as well as French, but probably more Spanish than French. So lots of things are geared in that way, and not so many on say Mandarin Chinese or Japanese. So according to each context, you get different languages which are more popular, and a lot of that has to do with sort of history and geography, I suppose. But there has been a big push in the UK, particularly from David Cameron, about we must all do Mandarin Chinese, etc. And I think a lot of that has to do with because the Conservative government wants to make business links with China, and it seems to be that every decade, let's say, there seems to be a certain language which is flavour of the month, probably for economic reasons. So in the 90s it was more Japanese, everyone should be learning Japanese. So which is like questionable now if you look at it from an economic point of view. Exactly, as well. So exactly, and things have all changed. But in the 90s, Japan were very much on the up economically speaking, and so I think I can't see French not always being the most taught language, but it's, as I said, it's been interesting the way that Spanish has become the second most popular one. But there are schools that offer Mandarin Chinese and Japanese, but it's still very, very niche. I mean, in Scotland, there's been lots of investment in the Confucius classrooms. There's been a lot of investment from China into Scottish schools as a way of promoting Mandarin Chinese, and that's great. And I think I totally welcome that. But at the same time, we need to encourage all languages. All languages are important. And there was a few years ago there was this whole idea in the way that the GCSEs were changing, that there would only you'd be expected to study only, let's say, 7 languages, and that was completely crazy. And I think that there were lots of teachers up in arms about it, and then they changed their mind. But that seems to be the present government in general. They just seem to be changing their mind left, right, and centre on lots of things to do with education. But let's not get political about this, folks. So, there we are. So, what have you got coming up in the next sort of coming weeks and months if people want to catch up with you as well? Okay, well, I'm planning on a trip to Australia in July, and so I should be going there for a week and a bit. I've also just recently had a talk at the biennial conference in New Zealand called NZALT. That was accepted, so officially I'm speaking at that, although I've got to work out to get there and what visa I need and all that. But anyway. So that's one big event. I'm also going to Switzerland in June, start of June, at a place called Aiglon College, which I've never been to before, and I'm really looking forward to that. And that all happened through Twitter. So there's a lady called Claire Shawcraft, who is the assistant head at the school, and we connected with each other on Twitter. We had a few Twitter conversations. I direct messaged her, said, I don't suppose you'd be interested in inviting me to Switzerland. And basically, the long and the short of it is that's what's happening. And a lot of the work I get in this country as well as abroad is through Twitter. So it's been an incredible vehicle for helping me to find work. So those are a few international things that I'm doing. But locally, let's see. I'm going to the e-twinning conference in Nottingham at the end of June, which I'm really looking forward to. And apart from that, I've got lots of sort of one-day events in individual schools. So a lot of the training that I'm doing at the moment is on iPads, how iPads can enhance language learning. but I'm also going into sort of Google ideas and Chromebooks. So at the ITEFL conference, I gave a 30-minute talk on how you could use certain Google tools to promote listening and speaking skills, and that was videoed, and that's available on the ITEFL website, which is really nice. So I'm keeping busy. May is historically quite, because people are doing GCSEs and things like that and revising and what have you. So that tends to be quite quiet. So I'm working from home next week on the primary French project, which is an amalgamate. It's like is a combination of Association of Language Learning, Institut Français, or French Institute, and Network for Languages. So there are 3 different levels now: Niveau Bleu, Niveau Blanc, and Niveau Rouge. And I'm working on Niveau Rouge, the ICT ideas to enhance the lessons that have been created by a lady called Catherine Cheetah, who's a primary languages specialist. So she's created the lesson contents, and I was commissioned to create ideas on how technology could enhance what she was doing in the lesson content. So I'm working on that next week. So I'm just busy, but just follow me on Twitter and you can find out exactly what I had for breakfast, plus everything else to do with
what is your Twitter account as well?
Okay, because I was very early in adopting Twitter.
One.
I've just gone for my name, so it's so just my name, no numbers or anything. So it's just Joe Dale, all lowercase, which is just great. I decided not to go for a pseudonym. I decided to just go for my name.
You could have ended up with sort of Angel 99 at that time, so that's quite a good thing.
Indeed,
probably.
Indeed. So I was very, very happy with that, and I'm very happy with my 18,000 followers. And if anyone would like to find out more about the MFL Twitterati, if you go to the link tinyurl.com/MFL Twitterati guide, then I've done a 9-page PDF on how to get involved, what Twitter is, the terminology behind Twitter, what a retweet means, how to follow a list, how to create a list, how to subscribe. So if you want to find out anything about that, have a look at the guide. If you get stuck, just get in contact, and I'm more than happy to help you out.
That's fantastic, and I know that the show notes for this one are going to take quite a while, so thank you for such a rich conversation, and we'll catch up again next time.
My pleasure, it's been great, thank you.
That's all for this week. Stay tuned next week for The Urban Teacher, and in the meantime, check us out on Facebook, rate and review on iTunes, and see you next time. Bye.